Welcome back to this Friday edition of Morning Live. And of course, this morning is a morning that we're covering this breaking news story of the death of former President Robert Mugabe. He has passed away. The word we're getting, he has died in a hospital in Singapore, aged 95 years old.
Now, we do know that Mugabe had been battling ill health, and Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa told a cabinet meeting 2 weeks ago that doctors had discontinued treatment. And Mugabe, of course, led Zimbabwe from 1980 until 2017 when he was ousted by the army.
Emmerson Mnangagwa, the president of Zimbabwe, took over in November 27 with the backing of the military. He went on to be elected in disputed elections in July last year.
February 1924, his birthplace was the rural Jesuit mission of Kutama at Zimba, about 90 kilometers west of Harare. Mugabe qualified as a teacher at the age of 17. He obtained the first of his many degrees from Fort Hare and UNISA in South Africa. After attending the late Kwame Nkrumah's Pan-African Congress in 1958, Mugabe taught for 2 years in Ghana. That's also where he met his first wife, the late Sally Hayfron. Back home, Mugabe rose to prominence as Secretary General of the Zimbabwe African National Union, or ZANU. The white minority government of the late Ian Smith arrested several liberation leaders in the early 1960s. Robert Mugabe was jailed for treason between 1964 and 1974. On his release, he joined Zimbabwe's freedom fighters in Mozambique. British mediated negotiations at Lancaster House in London in 1979 led to a peace agreement and new constitution which guaranteed minority rights. They culminated in elections for independent Zimbabwe in early 1980. ZANU emerged victorious and Robert Mugabe became Zimbabwe's first prime minister. President Mugabe was one of the world's longest ruling leaders. He led Zimbabwe from the 18th April 1980 when Rhodesia gained independence from Britain. He initially offered an olive branch to the white minority and introduced much-needed social reforms. Zimbabwe's new leader was feted globally for his conciliatory stance towards his former enemies. A comprehensive social program was rolled out in Zimbabwe. It included free primary education and health care, as well as the expansion of roads, electricity, and telephone network. But it was also a time of tragedy. In 1982, Joshua Nkomo and his Zimbabwe African People's Union, or ZAPU, were accused of plotting a coup d'etat. Arms caches were found in Nkomo's stronghold of Matabeleland. Many suspected apartheid South Africa of fueling the ZAPU-ZANU rift. Mugabe unleashed his North Korean-trained 5th Brigade in Operation Kukurahundi, or Cleansing Rain. Thousands of Nkomo supporters and alleged dissidents were killed. Didimus Mutasa was a Mugabe loyalist. Robert Mugabe's reconciliatory efforts were challenged in 1985 when several white voters returned to Smith's Republican Front to Parliament. Following the so-called dissident period, ZANU and ZAPU signed a unity accord in 1987. It gave birth to ZANU-PF, established one-party rule in Zimbabwe, and resulted in Robert Mugabe becoming executive president with additional powers. In the early 1990s, Zimbabwe adopted the World Bank Structural Adjustment Program to modernize its economy. It entailed conditional funding for development. Within 5 years, though, the country faced mounting debt. In the late 1990s, Mugabe bowed to pressure from former freedom fighters to pay them millions, including monthly pensions.
You will
be paid eventually. There is no reason for strikes. It's just that some don't appreciate that they have a government that has given them land, jobs, and well-being. They don't want to understand that we too, while fighting for our independence, worked for little monetary reward.
The deployment of about 40,000 Zimbabwean soldiers to the DRC drained Zimbabwe's coffers. It also experienced its most violent food droughts following price increases, especially for mealie meal. All of this led to an emergence of opposition movement for democratic change. The tightly contested March 2008 presidential and parliamentary elections marked a turning point in Zimbabwe's political landscape. Even though Mugabe remained president after 2 rounds of voting, he was forced into a SADC-facilitated power-sharing government with the MDC factions of Morgan Tsvangirai and Dr. Arthur Mutambara. But Mugabe's leadership was tarnished from the early 1980s by the Matabeleland massacres, land invasions of white-owned commercial farms, and Zimbabwe's subsequent economic collapse.
We have said, even as we acquire our land, we shall not deprive the white farmers of land completely. Every one of them is entitled to at least 1 farm, but they would want to continue to have more than 1 farm. More than 1 farm indeed. 15, 20, 35 farms, 1 person. These are not figures I am just getting out of my mind. They are real figures. So no farmer is being left without land.
The land invasions plunged Zimbabwe economy into free-for-all. The agricultural sector died. The Bretton Woods institutions stopped lending money to Zimbabwe when it couldn't honor its financial obligations.
The International Monetary Fund has never been a fund for the poor peasants seeking sustainable development. Even the United Nations, a body that is supposed to give us equal voices, remains unreformed. For these reasons, we join our brothers and sisters in the Third World in rejecting completely manipulative and intimidatory attempts by some countries and regional blocs that are bent on subordinating our sovereignty to their hegemonic ambitions and imperialist interests.
Prices skyrocketed. Shops ran out of stock. Government couldn't pay its workers. Typhoid and cholera broke out when basic services collapsed. Millions of Zimbabweans fled. When the Commonwealth suspended Zimbabwe, Mugabe simply withdrew his country's membership. Several industrialized nations, including the United States and United Kingdom, imposed sanctions on Mugabe and his inner circle. At the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg in 2002, Mugabe was defiant.
Having and bearing sanctions banning us from Europe, we are not Europeans. We have not asked for any inch of Europe, or any square inch of that territory. So, Blair, keep your England and let me keep my Zimbabwe.
A 4-year power-sharing deal between his party ZANU-PF and 2 factions of the opposition movement for democratic change from 2009 was rocky. But it culminated in a new constitution, an overwhelmingly election victory for Mugabe in 2013. Since then, he's consolidated power and purged some senior leaders for allegedly plotting to oust him. But many regard this as a strategy for Mugabe's wife Grace to succeed him. Mugabe intensified his drive to transfer more resources to Zimbabweans through a new indigenization policy. It's designed to increase black ownership of foreign firms to 51%. For some, this is a critical element of Robert Mugabe's legacy. Mugabe lambasted those he accused of trying to oust him. And in recent times, the veteran leader had this to say on his age and life.
He who made us, he who is creator of heaven and earth, I wouldn't be here. And happiness that is mine on this day as I count 93 years. Is a fortune.
And he also delivered this message to those who are calling on him to step down.
If I still have the energy and still have the life and the blessings of God, I'll continue. Journalists, tell those you are representing that Robert Mugabe is still here, well and strong.